My name is Will Edmonds and I cover CrossFit for CNN. I recently went to Training Think Tank in Alpharetta to meet with Max El-Hag, coach of Noah Olsen, the breakout star of the 2019 CrossFit Games, as well as Will Moorad and Travis Mayer. These two athletes important because they were right on the cut line for the top 10. We also spoke about Noah's year, the fact that he almost did not make the games, and Travis's let's just say, difficult games this year, being so close to making the top 10 and ultimately falling short. So to me, Noah was the breakout story of the games, right? Yeah. To hear the cheers when he came out was really cool. And I feel like because of the films and because of certain interviews he did when he was young and in the sport, there was a lot of people that didn't really understand Noah, right? Yeah. Like some people thought he was kind of cocky. He was cocky, he'll admit to that, or at least he knows that he was perceived that way. Those of us that know him know that he is genuinely a nice guy, and he is, that sort of like persona that some people might think he's trying to, that's really him. Yeah. And I feel like it was the first time the crowd really got to see that. It was pretty cool, right? Yeah,
it was really cool. I think there's always going to be contention amongst athletes because they're competing against one another, and he's different. Like, just as a person, even we were talking about before we started rolling, like his competitive personality is more about performance for the fans. And then if you look at somebody else, like juxtapose that with Matt Frazier, who's like, I want to win, hard work pays off, where a lot of it is about like what you're going to get to support and grow your personal brand. And so I think anytime somebody's that different, there's always going to be like some polarization response from how people perceive him. And this is a weird sport that people became professional and visible so quick. Mm-hmm. They didn't really have the process of figuring out like how mean the media can be and how quickly it could turn on you by just saying one thing off the cuff, right? Like one little soundbite that you say, and then it gets a million people to analyze it because most people aren't used to having cameras on them and recording. So it was cool to see that this year, and how many people wanted him to win. Like even when he was in second, the cheers, like after Matt had won the back-to-back workouts on Sunday and took the lead back over, and he went out to the finals with the leader's jersey, when they called out Noah's name in second place, it was still the loudest cheer of of Sunday. So I thought that was pretty cool. Now,
as a coach, have you ever tried to sort of rein in the sort of him walking out and waving to the crowd and tell him to be more focused, or you know that you've got to let him be?
I don't think that, or at least from my own perspective, I don't think that distracts him from what he has to do on game day. Like what the actual, like when it says 3, 2, 1, go. I don't think Noah has any sort of problem engaging with that moment to race. And I think for whatever reason, paying attention to the crowd, paying attention to the cheers, being able to think about all the people up there that he's doing it for allows him to be in a better mind state when he performs. So instead of trying to think of it like, hey, I'm going to try to take this guy who's just built like this and make him do things differently because other people have done it that way successfully, I'm going to just let him be him and then only step in. Like there are some times in training when like he gets unfocused or undisciplined or he's not on time for things. But really over the last 3 years, he's not just like morphed himself as a competitor, but he's also morphed himself as a human, how he handles like his professional approach to getting better as an athlete. So I don't really step in on that. I just say like, okay, I'll help you get you better at training, give you these tools, and then when you go out, we'll talk about strategy, and then when you get on the floor, you do your thing. And I'm not really there. You know? I'm not building him.
Do you think if the games took place behind closed doors with no crowd that he would have finished second? Or you think he'd be way down there?
I don't know if anyone would, but definitely not him. I think in some sense, the energy that a crowd provides and an actual viewership provides is one of the things that creates world-class performance. It's like accountability. Like you train by yourself in your garage, even just like at a normal level, and you're doing row intervals and they start to get hard. It's so easy to be like, I'll back off a couple seconds, but you go into a group class and now, you're training with 20 of your close friends. Then like, all right, well, if I slow down here, I'm gonna lose. And so I think some of what's required for all of them is that kind of connection with the audience and the whole race dynamic.
I think it's really interesting being a coach of Noah because Before the events began, a lot of the media and I were talking. We were like, someone's going to go home early.
Yeah.
We're like, someone's going to make a mistake. Someone's going to have a bad start. We're like, Pat Vellner has bad starts. Pat Vellner has bad events. But the consensus on a lot of people was that the big profile star who could go home early is Noah.
Yeah.
Because he makes mistakes. At Wadapalooza, if he had the first day from Wadapalooza at the games, he'd have gone home. It must be quite frustrating to work with someone who has so much talent, who has made mistakes. Was there a moment this last week where you looked at you like, finally, like this is it. This is the Noah we've seen that we know can do it.
Yeah. I don't know if there was a specific moment, but I did notice that this time approaching it was different. Like we had a lot of talks leading up, and I just happened to be reading a book about sports performance. And right in the book, it said like one of the best ways is to cope with it is just accepting that the anticipation of that like gross feeling you get leading into competition, which generally for him has just been at the games. Like Wadapalooza, he's won multiple times before going into that in his home environment. He's comfortable. He knows the fans are going to be there. But the games has traditionally been a place where he gets a ton of criticism, of criticism from people saying he goes out too hot, him blowing up on the rope climbs. There hasn't really been from an expert opinion perspective that, hey, this guy's finished 4th in the world, 6th in the world, 8th in the world. Like, it's not like he's a chump showing up, but that amongst a lot of people was the dialogue defining him. And I think it's really easy to start to slip into believing you're like that. And I think this year, for whatever reason, whether it's like us talking, him growing on his own, him just becoming, a man or whatever and growing up into his sense of self, he started to figure out how to draw boundaries around saying like, I can do this, I know what to do, I've done it on big stages, and now I just need to put it together without a catastrophic issue, some of which those issues are not his fault in the past, and sometimes it was probably pacing or fatigue or whatever causes them to happen.
What's interesting about, I want to say he was one of the last to qualify, right?
Yeah.
Like he almost didn't make it, which we can talk about the qualification process, where, if he wins this, that really sort of brings a lot of questions up. But like, how was his preparation in the sort of, let's say from January to whenever he qualified, knowing that he might not even be going to the games?
Yeah, I don't think we ever really thought he wouldn't make it, but the entire year really wasn't great for him from a prep standpoint. At the games change shook him up a lot. And, he
thought about quitting, right?
Yeah, I mean,
toyed with the idea.
Yeah, he had thoughts of it. I don't think he ever really, like, what his thought is he's dedicated all this time to the sport and to, he got into it, even though he's a big part of Peak 360's gym community, which is just like a normal CrossFit affiliate. Yeah. He got into it because of the sport, the idols that he had, right? Rich Froning was one of his idols growing up, and Guido Trinidad and some of the people that he trained with in his earlier days. And then that sparked him to start to be like, I want to win the games. When the change happened and there wasn't communication from it from the top down that came out, he thought, well, now is the fittest on earth not going to matter? Like, is the CrossFit Games title not going to matter? Are people just going to do the sanctionals? And I think some of his motivation was tied to the external goal. And then he had like some family stuff going on. He had some health issues with a kidney stone, and all of that stuff played into just not really having optimal preparation. Then the first workout of the Open was rowing and wall balls, which are two things that we've continually worked on, but they're just not his strong sets.
Yeah,
and there's very few shorter athletes that put up numbers that were good enough to get in. So that was just like, all right, it is what it is. Let's climb back. Then he did really well on 2, 3, 4, and then realized mathematically it's just not going to play out. So you're investing a month of like super high level performance and emotional like investment to figure out, okay, it's not going to happen. So then that's a demoralizing situation on top of having the blow up experience at Wadapalooza, then going to, 2 sanctionals and finishing, I think he finished 3rd at Italy. And then he went to Rogue and finished 6th or 7th, and it was just like, like neither of those performances were great. They weren't, super positive and optimistic. And then we sat down before the games, and I was like, all right, right after Rogue, you got this amount of period of time to train. And take all of the stuff that's happened after that. You got a qualifying bid. Everything resets. Nothing matters. having no pressure on you is probably better. Like people aren't going to think anything about you, and you can go in there and try to prove them wrong. We had a great training block, 2 full week training camps up here. He had a training camp down there. We worked on we set down a list of all the things at previous year's games that were traditionally held him back a little bit. Some of the longer running, some of the higher power cyclical conditioning stuff, grip on rope climbs. And we basically put together a list, a testing body, and said let's go through these tests and train all of your resources for the next 8 weeks on this and get you there feeling healthy. Because there's always been something, before last year at the games, he pulled his hamstring, his shoulder was achy, just everything was kind of beat up. And for whatever reason, the stars just kind of aligned this year that period of time leading in was just perfect, and he was ready to perform.
So could you tell going into the games, you're like, okay, he's got it. You could tell something was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always hopeful and optimistic. Right. If things are going well in training, then I think anybody that I'm going to the competition with, I feel all right, it's their time. Everyone's a contender until that moment where they become a champion. It's and something clicks psychologically, something clicks physically. There's a belief component to it. It's not just some simple step-by-step process. At some point, there's this exponential growth in your sense of capability to tolerate a moment like that. So I think I went in thinking all 3 of the athletes that I coached were about to have that moment because they all were healthy, they all had good training going in, and he just happened to be the one that, it manifested for.
So it was day 2, right, that he made his big breakthrough, is that right? On Friday? Was that the sled push and Mary?
Yeah, sled push and Mary.
So the sled push, I was right behind his lane watching him. I thought he'd won the event. Was this one in the other heat?
Someone from Heat 1
Someone from Heat 1, because I posted something and a lot of people were correcting me. I was like, wait, no, I was there. I saw it. He crushed everyone.
Yeah.
How much did he lose by? Was it just a fraction?
I think it was a second or something like that.
Because he flew. The people in his heat, the big names, he flew past them.
Yes.
Was that a surprise to you?
So I know his muscle up speed when he's going at full speed is fast, because he did grid, which some of grid back in the day, it trained that. Your actual rep speed mattered because everything was full sprinting. But traditionally in training, him and sleds are not they're not his favorite thing. And generally it's the last portion of something where he's man, my legs were burning. We actually did sled workouts, sandbag drag workouts at both of the games camps, and all of those relative to the field of athletes, which is definitely not as deep as the games, he didn't win those. He didn't really even do that well on them. So when he just crushed the back half of the sled, that's what impressed me, because he was sprinting with that thing.
He was sprinting, and in the lane over is Patrick Vellner, who's struggling to walk with the thing. And I was it was really bizarre to watch. And it was that was the first thing I was like, okay, he's got this. And I think that put him into second place for the evening session, right?
Yes.
So he was going to be head-to-head with Matt Fraser and Mary. And that was one of the most exciting things. And that's where I felt as we were talking about before, that you felt that the crowd was all in on the Noah Olsen story.
Yeah.
Because I think he pulled into a 4 or 5 rep lead quite early. Yeah. And then every single time he completed something unbroken, the crowd, everyone was willing, don't drop. Don't let go, don't let go. That's exciting, right? To see him going against Matt Fraser, who I'm guessing, I'm going to put words in your mouth, a few years ago might have intimidated him, to sort of think that this guy's, as soon as I make a mistake, there. And he wasn't scared. Yeah. And he stayed ahead the whole time and kept that lead. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was super enjoyable. And also just to shut people up about pacing. The dude has been so good in so many stages, and there's really only a couple athletes can ever say they pace things perfectly. And generally, if your capacity is greater than the field, it's easy to make it look like you're pacing appropriately if you can have a finishing kick for the last whatever minute of a workout. But, executing that every single time, I think is impossible. We've seen even Vellner make major mistakes on the big stage, but he comes back and takes second, so no one talks about being the thing.
Well, this game's actually, in interviews afterwards, Matt Fraser said that Vellner tried to keep up with him too long and messed, and Vellner told him afterwards, I haven't heard Vellner say this, but said to Matt, had I just kept to my pace, I'd have finished second in that event.
On the first workout,
where he saw he started missing snatches that were... Yeah. Was it snatches?
Yeah, it was 185 snatches.
But it is interesting. I think largely, and I love Master Nahiba, I think their work's incredible, but those films have been quite critical of Noah.
Yeah,
certainly a couple of years ago. you know, when it had other athletes talking about him.
Yeah.
It was the rope climb, ladder.
The overhead squat,
And the overhead
ski
squats.
erg,
He
rope
went
climb
out
workout.
way too fast and fell back.
Yeah.
And
but it still was he was only one rep ahead of Matt in that first round. So I've always believed, and I told him when we first started working together, I said, look, with your subset of skills and the depth of your skill base, there's a couple things you need to work on, but if you can get those better, you can contend to win the games. Not just like, you know, there's some people that if you just look at like their size relative to what comes out in the testing body, they're pretty unlikely to ever win because there's gonna be, like Mary had 300 pull-ups in it for the winners. If you're 210 pounds, that's going to be a really hard thing for you to develop. And you look at the size profile of all the people that did really well on it, and they're smaller. So there is some component to finding an optimal size and optimal skill set that makes for a potential champion. And like if you look at Matt Fraser and Froning, like they're pretty close.
Noah's a lot bigger though, not in height, but in terms of mass.
He's pretty similar to.
You think so?
He's just
he's more like a cannonball. I mean, it's not Chan. It's funny.
Weight-wise, the same.
Oh, he is weight-wise
yeah.
because he is. You know, he's got a lot more. You know, look, not quite Chandler Smith. I was going to say, who doesn't even look human.
Yeah,
he looks like he looks like a comic book guy. Like when he took his shirt off, you're like, that's like you could train your whole life for that. There's some DNA thing going on. He's incredible. And the crowd loved him as well. But yeah, Noah's that evening during Mary. It was like, for me, like it was goosebumps there because Noah's probably the person I'm closest with out there, to hear the fans just going absolutely crazy for him and to hear him hold on, because anyone that's been a Noah Olsen fan for a few years knows something's going to go wrong. Yeah. And it didn't. Yeah. And he kept it together and it was awesome.
Yeah, it felt really good. It was all, I think for like coming off the field or coming off the floor, I think that moment solidified for him that the stuff he's good at, he is like the best at, and if he can execute, he can compete with the best. Now, there were other tests, and if you look at the whole breadth of tests and Matt's capabilities over those tests, he still showed that he's probably better and deserved to win. But I hope that just moments like that at the games were enough to give Noah the belief that, like, okay, well, I can go out there and beat him, especially if he makes a mistake, right? And like, you know, he made a mistake with the penalty this year, but that doesn't mean he can't make a mistake in execution. Or I was thinking about the testing body and what would have happened from a spectator perspective. What happens if they put the sprint as the first workout of the games and potentially Matt Fraser could get cut? And like, you know, there's the sport literally has changed. Like the whole dynamics of it changed, and we don't really know top down what they're trying to test, if the scoring is going to reflect the best top 10 athletes, or if their old thing was, we don't care about anything else other than solidifying the winner being the fittest person on earth. That was their old claim. Now that it's a sport and all these other sanctionals, I don't know if it'll be the same, but hopefully we'll get information about where it's going.
Well, we'll get to that, but I want to stay with Noah. I want to go all the way through Noah's journey, because I think, you know, the question I asked Armin at the games, you know, when Noah was brushing his teeth at night looking in the mirror, was he seeing the fittest man on earth, or was he seeing the second or third? What do you think?
I mean, from our talks, I think he saw the winner, but there was a moment on Sunday, so he had the leader's jersey, he won the swim workout, and then he came up to me like, I think it was right after they announced the back-to-back workouts, the assault toaster ring and the overhead squat burpee, and he was like, "Can we do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, you are doing this. Like, you're doing it right now." And yeah, I mean, I think he believed it, but I also think he understood how much of a war it was going to be. Like that, you don't win 3 back-to-back games is without being a savage of an athlete and figuring out how to compete when you need to compete. But I do think that he believed it, but probably not with 100% certainty and without doubt.
Now, those 2 events is obviously where...
Yeah, that was where the separation happened,
Was it a physical thing? Was it a mental thing? Was it just a programming thing that those weren't strong for him?
Yeah, so like one of the major targets of his training has always been cyclical, high-power stuff. So assault bike, rowing, ski erg, he's pretty good relative to the field. I think that's just maybe from swimming and having like the lats developed to be able to do that. Running, if it's like 400-meter repeats paired with something super high power. So when you know something is your major training priority and you're working on it all the time, it's definitely when it comes up, you're like, oh God, like, I'm going to really need to perform in the thing that I'm least confident in on the biggest stage against the best competitor the sport's potentially ever seen. So it wasn't the workout that came out that we would want to see if he wanted the best shot, but it was also something that he felt confident that he worked on. So we set our pace for that first one, and it was like the pace that we set extended him outside of what his training capabilities were. And I told him...
Because of adrenaline, you think? Or you just felt like he was the time?
No, we knew that he had to. Okay. I was like, if you're going to take him on, like, you can't fall too far back on a workout that's this fast. But we also knew, or I knew, that he couldn't really empty the tank on that first one fully, because he did that before in the bicouplet with the power snatch muscle up from the previous workout, and then the light power snatch chest to bar workout following it, he got crushed. And you saw it with James Newberry. Like, James Newberry dominated the first workout, and the effort that went into that affected not just the second workout, but his final workout as well. So I think we made the right call there, and I think he only lost 2 places on Matt, but that's still like 20 points. And that wouldn't have been the one that I thought would have, like, that he would have been able to beat Matt on. But the overhead squat burpee, that was, I think, he just put so much effort into being competitive in the first one and couldn't recover fast enough. Like, his burpee pace started to fall off. He started taking a couple extra steps. So I think it was that he just needs to be better. Like, I don't like to say that, and, well, on camera, I would say that to his face more comfortably, but...
but he knows that as well.
Yeah,
he knows that. He knows
sure.
that Matt won.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he didn't lose it.
Yeah.
Where, like, he lost second at previous year's games. This year, I think he earned it. He made Matt worry for at least a day. He kept the leader jersey for a whole day, which was pretty cool. But that's just something, like, he needs to be able to go at full speed on something where you can't hide with a ton of contractions, rest a short period of time, and then get back in and do another test right after it at high power. And that's just, it takes some training time.
Now, do you look at, like, the game plan and think, you know what, we might have gone too hard there or gone too slow here? Or do you think that he executed the plan?
From a strategy perspective?
From a strategy perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you could always we always do retroactively look at it and say, like, all right, you were perfect here, you were perfect here. Then you kind of have to analyze after that. Is this an execution issue or is it a physical issue? If you have a physical issue, we can train it. If you have an execution issue, it's just, I think, about creating awareness so that the next time you're in a position like that, you can change your behavior. You can't really train that, though. You can't train execution. It's just like the more competition experience you get, it kind of layers onto itself to give you confidence in those moments to make better decisions. So we haven't done our full review yet, but
off the top of your head, it seemed like there was no major mistakes, right?
Yeah, he was pretty clean throughout the whole weekend in terms of performance. That would be the one workout. Well, actually, the big workout was the finale. I think he could have beat Matt, and I know it wouldn't have mattered, but it would have been a nice, like, for me, a good storybook second ending to beat him, because it looked like when they finished the muscle-ups, Matt was a little bit more fatigued. Matt ran up to the bar, did 5 touch and go unbroken, and Noah just kind of methodically worked through them, and we were playing for second at that point. I was like, look, for Matt to take 5th in a field of 10 on a workout like this is almost impossible. So pay attention to BKG, run your own race, stay calm, and let's take second and stand on the podium, which is what we've been aiming for the last 3 years together. But I think, had he decided after the set, when he got to 20 total snatches, had he decided to start his touch and go sequence there, I think he could have passed him, which would have been, for me, like, that would have been the thing that made the weekend, like,
Have you talked to him about that? Did it cross his mind?
We haven't. I mean, he's just a positive dude, right? Like, his tagline's happy but hungry. Right. I'm like a skeptical cynic, where I'm like trying to look at every detail. So there's a time for it. And
but also, had he gone touch and go and then blown up and BKG kind of, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
But also, so what's interesting to talk to now about, he said that he nearly was crying before he went out to the final event.
Yeah.
Because he knew that it was in his hands. He knew that he was going to get second, barring anything going crazy. Yeah. That's a great thing.
Yeah.
But it's a problem, right? Yeah. Like, second moving forward shouldn't be enough.
Yeah.
I thought it was, it was great to say how emotional and how happy he was, and seeing him on the podium in second was great. But that can't be it moving forward. He can't be going in going, I've made the podium. That's great, right?
Yeah. Well, I think so. When we set goals this year for the games, I I've always tried to be the more aggressive, like, dude, let's shoot for the stars. Like, you're so good. Like, don't sell yourself short and say, I want to do this. Like, go out there to win. At some point, I realized, like, a winner or a champion is internally driven to make that happen. You can't convince somebody to want it hard enough in that moment to win. It's got to be something that they genuinely want because they're on the floor by themselves. So this year leading in, he was like, you know what? I just want to set the goal to win. And then we can have secondary goals. Like, obviously the best secondary goal would be to get on the podium. And then, like, each placing from there would be a loss after that. Yeah. So I think
it's one thing to say it, though. Did he believe it? Did he genuinely believe going in that he could
you'd have to ask him. I don't know. I believe he can. And I believe really there's a lot of people in the field that can. He's just got to not execute. Yeah. And he has before. Like, he's shown people can give the illusion of perfection or the illusion that they can't make mistakes for a period of time, but eventually, like, I don't know, you go in, you're injured, or you go in and you're sore, you go in and, you pull a hamstring in an early event and you have to compete for the next 4 days. Like, there are so many things that happen in a sport that's rigorous like this that he's been able to navigate for 4 straight years, but it's never a guarantee. And I feel like if you let somebody get comfortable in that and you submit to their intimidation before you even show up, then, like, why are you there competing? So I think he believes that it can happen, but I also think he's aware of the magnitude of the challenge it is to try to dethrone somebody that's done it for 4 straight years at a super dominant level. Like, everywhere he went, he's won.
That is true, but for the last few years, it's always been, Vikowski's going to be the one, Vellner's going to be one. Yeah. Noah's the only one that's really tested him in the last few years. Do you think we're going to see a new Noah? Not in terms of, like, maybe his performance or stuff, but just in the little confidence where he's not coming to you going, do you think we can do this? But, like, I got this.
I think so. I mean, I do think that something changed in him after doing it this year. And I think some of it, too, is just enjoyment. Like, people who are out there giving the amount of effort that they're giving for a whole year to go out and have, like, a bad performance or, like, 2 catastrophic issues and then hear a bunch of criticism about that. That narrative, whether you want it to affect you or not, does penetrate your psyche and your belief system. Now the narrative is going to shift where there's a huge amount of people that just want him to win because people, like, don't like somebody to be dominant for too long. They want to see a challenge. They want to see a contender. Then he performed really well, and he is really well-rounded. Like, he's good at everything in the sport. People are like, oh, he's not strong. He cleaned 355 and almost stood up 365. Like, he deadlifts over 525. Like, he's got all of the tools from a metric perspective to compete. There's a couple things, like the ruck run taking 24th this year. If that were a field of 75 or a field of 150, that could have potentially been an issue. Whereas you see, Frazier was in the top 10 of that, even, like, with the bag fallout, he was almost at the finish line anyway. Like, there's a performance gap there that he's going to need to close if he wants to be, like, if he wants to not have any weakness exposed. But, he's pretty damn good at everything. And I think people realize that, and maybe the narrative shifting and people talking about it differently will start to do the same type of thing in a positive sense to give him confidence that the negative criticism did to undermine his confidence before. So I guess only the future will tell us that.
I hope so. It'll also be interesting to see if other athletes now give him more respect or fear him in a way that people have feared Fraser, because that makes a difference.
Yeah, for
when
sure.
When you go into an event and you're in a heat or something and Noah's there and you're like, crap, Noah's there, that affects your performance. So hopefully it does benefit it. We have to talk about the cuts.
Yeah.
So my perspective broadly on what is unique about CrossFit and the CrossFit Games that makes it great is that most sports, let's say you're a fan of soccer or the NFL, you go and watch a game, your favourite player might not be playing. You might not even be seeing your favourite team, you enjoy the sport. CrossFit's different because we don't know what the sport is, right? Yeah. You go to an event, you don't know, you're not going to be, I'm a big rowing fan, I'm a big double unders fan. You might not see those. You're a fan of the individuals.
Yeah.
And it's really cool in that you can, say, like, I want to watch Sarah Sigmund's daughter all weekend, I'm going to put that in my calendar and watch it. This is the first year you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Like, the unknown and the unknowable also pertain to who's competing,
who's in the field,
which was really strange. And I think everybody got, sticker shock when it went from 20 to 10, because the field of 20 looked right. You had all the names you wanted. You had a lot of sort of, like Casper and stuff from Denmark, and people like upcomers, and like, oh, this is kind of cool. Yeah. But no one was missing, I think, or at least, that was healthy. Then it got down to 10, and then suddenly it was like, well, what about Sarah? I want to see Brooke compete. Where's Travis? It was really strange, and it was. My guess is that there was an assumption that Pat Vellner would be in the top 10.
Yeah.
There was an assumption that Sarah Sigmundsdottir would be in the top 10. The top 10 did not feel like the 10 fittest in the world. You know, by the test that they had, and I saw Jacob Hepner did a video explaining that, you know, in the pyramid that, you know, they kind of did stick to the core components, but it was brutal, right?
Yeah,
like it was.
Yeah. I heard Glassman on a podcast a couple days before the game saying they went through like some sort of regression analysis of past year's games with this new format and that the podiums wouldn't change. And I think in some ways he was half right. Like if you look at the top 5 guys, Fraser obviously won. Noah has been 6-4 in the last 2 games before that. So being in second is like not that far off. BKG has been in the top 6 for like 5.
He podiumed before,
Yeah, he
right?
podiumed once and has been in the mix. Panchik has been 4th like 40 times. Newberry has definitely been a staple at the games, but not traditionally in the top 5. But I don't think anyone would be like, oh, he's not a good CrossFitter. So like that's pretty good. On the female side, Katrin took 5th. So, you know.
4th.
Oh, Katrin took 4th.
She took 4th,
Carrie Pierce?
Carrie Pierce.
She's been in the top. Jamie Green, Kristen Holtby, and Tia Toomey, like those names are traditionally top 10 athletes. So I think it's pretty good.
And Tia would have won any format.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other side of that is...
And the same on the team, we say as well, you know, Mayhem, they won in the old format, they won in this. So the 3 winners, you would expect.
Yeah. Now, I think things probably would have changed had you left a deeper field of athletes for longer time.
Yes.
Because I think the 6 tests they put out, I do think if you just look at those 6 tests and be like, hey, if people went through these 6 tests, would you get a very fit athlete? Yes, but according to like the definition of CrossFit for fitness, like the 10 general skills, the Hopper model, broad work capacity across broad time modal domains, and even just looking at the sport as a whole, like the variety of tests they've done, like I don't think there was a full testing body to really allow the people that did get through to get exposed and the people that got exposed early to have a chance to offset those exposed weak points with their biggest strengths. And we are looking at a sport of averages. So the more you are at a higher average level of performance on all of the tests, theoretically, from a math perspective, that's the more fit person. So I'm not sure the scoring system or the cut system identifies that perfectly, but I don't know if it matters. I think what most people were probably upset with, and maybe even some of the athletes, is that we didn't really have a clear and identifiable understanding of how the process was going to work before we showed up. Even the unknown and unknowable keep it that way, but if you don't know what you're training for, it's impossible to know like how to prepare, how to train for that, what variables you need to train. And so I think that probably, and the shocking nature of the change and pulling some of the big names out, it kind of undermines some of like the fan and athlete experience.
Massively.
Yeah, which I don't, you know, it's a first new format, and I don't run a big competition, so I don't want to like give too much criticism, but I do definitely think there should be some learning to find a better system for if you're going to cut to top 10. And it's a sport, because if it's just a test of fitness where your only goal is to take first, which I don't know if I really buy, because why would there be a podium then?
Yeah.
It should just be like a throne.
Yes.
Like, oh, you did it, you're on the throne. If there's a podium, it means this person is the second fittest. So that means that the test needs to be like measurable, repeatable, and have some sort of accurate validity to assign a point value that is reflective of fitness, which I don't think we've gotten to yet as a sport.
I mean, the other thing to remember is that the games has changed every year, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to keep changing.
Yeah.
Now, I think that so my theory is that we had 2 situations. One, they had the national champions and everyone, which I actually thought was really cool.
Yeah.
I wasn't too sure about it until I saw the opening ceremony. I was like, okay, this is cool. I got like choked up. So I think it was Botswana's danced around. I was like, that's cool. So you had like a massive field to begin with, and I think they had this idea for a weightlifting competition, you know, just to have one person get the entire state. And that was really cool, to have the whole stadium focused in on one person at a time. If you'd have had a field of 20 of men's and women's, that's going to take 7 hours.
Yeah.
So my guess, and also even at the length they had it on Saturday, you couldn't do that on Sunday where you have more events. So they had those two problems. They had this massive field, and they had to get down to 10 if they wanted to do that this year.
And logistically,
So I see that. Now, if they were to get rid of that event or do something different where they had multiple barbells out there or something, it wouldn't have been such an issue. So that's why I think they did it. And I think that had Pat Vellner, Sarah, who was sort of the big fan. They were the big two, right? Maybe Brooke Wells.
Yeah, Fikowski.
Fikowski too.
Let's
Let's say if those four had qualified in the top 10, I don't think many people would have been complaining.
Yeah.
But there were two...
Fans?
The fans complaining.
Fans.
Oh no, certainly athletes and coaches. I'm coming from a fan perspective. They were just like, this doesn't feel like... I remember the first year I went, just listening just to Sarah's popularity is far in excess of everybody's, Pat Vellner's too.
Yeah.
I think Noah absorbed all of Pat Vellner's fans. He sucked them in. But I think that was a problem, and I think that 20 felt right. And I think that they might look at that. It'd be interesting because if they go back to 20 next year, it'll almost be like admitting fault.
Yeah.
So they might not do that straight away. They might stick to 10. But the other argument is Matt Fraser was in no risk of getting cut.
Yeah.
Tia was in no risk of getting cut. If you should
but what happens if they did?
If they did, I mean...
That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the
but that's why you saw in the first event that Matt and Tia went out as if it was the final event that they had to win.
Yeah.
And as did Pat Vellner, and it hurt him. But it's... I guess they're going to keep working it out. My understanding is that Greg Glassman loved this format, was very happy with it.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what Dave's role is in terms of if that was his decision or... I mean, he seemed like during the games that he was the man and in charge. But you're more the expert of programming and formatting. I mean, overall, let's assume that all the big names went through. Do you think that the 12 events were a good test?
Yeah, I mean, I think they all kind of fall into the lines of what CrossFit's definition of fitness is. Like there was long, simple running with weight. There was sprinting. There was gymnastics. There was Metcons. There was back-to-back Metcons where you challenged recoverability. There was heavy lifting. There were some things that were omitted from the body of tests that we've seen from a pattern perspective over the last years. So like from a patterning perspective, we have traditionally seen a lot of barbells at the games and a lot of barbells tested in a repeat format or heavy format, and a lot of that was pulled out. And if the pattern's changes the profile of the athletes going, it's just, I mean, to me, it's obvious that the subset of tests is gonna dictate the most successful athlete. So, I mean, it would be nice, and I think we're moving in this direction one way or the other, like whether CrossFit Games does it or whether it's the independent owners of all the sanctionals, for us to try to start to figure out like, okay, CrossFit is a belief system and an ideology one. It's also a business and affiliate management system too, but now, whether they like it or not, their test of fitness has turned into a sport of fitness. And that sport of fitness, if it's going to be called a sport and it's not just like a Hunger Games, come here and see who survives at the end of it, it's gonna need some sort of standardization. It's gonna need, hey, what are we testing? Like, how are we gonna try to get these 10 general skills into a testing format? How are we gonna make sure that people that are winning sanctionals are good representatives of the fitness ideologies of the people who created this fitness ideology? I think at some point, there's going to need to be more people talking about it. And right now, there's like, who makes the decisions? We don't know. Like we literally don't even know who created the workouts at the games. So it's really hard to say like, who do we talk to? Who do we voice our opinions? These athletes are training and going to competitions. They're paying to go to competitions where they don't even know the rules. Like that doesn't seem like a system for creating an organized sport. Now, it's worked, it's grown, it's been awesome. I love doing it, so I keep going back. But I do think at some point, if we're gonna call it a sport, there's gonna need to be that type of discussion, whether it's governance, whether it's just like some sort of open communication format where people can voice their opinions. Because some of the things that happen, people have been talking about for years that there might be like easy solutions to changing. Like, you know, on a speed ladder, people are giving the judges authority. Instead of doing that, maybe it could just be like, hey, let everyone go through and make sure we have videos of everyone doing it. And you could video review afterwards and give people penalties after the fact. Because if you get called on a no rep on the floor of a speed ladder, you're automatically out of that round, which is a huge, huge subjective penalty to put on somebody's eye that's a judge who's a volunteer judge who's not being paid. So instead of doing that, like there are ways that I think we all could get together to create better solutions. And it sucks because the only format you have to do it is, you know, like a camera like this, where you're almost seem like you're providing criticism, which could be coming from a place of frustration as opposed to like, hey, this is just me trying to make it better for fans, for athletes, for coaches, so that it can be a professional sport over time.
To me, the biggest criticism I heard, or the most debated, the most controversial event was the sprint event, for two reasons. One, it was the cull, right? It like everyone was happy down to 20, and then to 10. A lot of I heard I won't say who it was, but a big name media person in this world, and someone from HQ really going at it as to whether or not that was a good test of fitness. I personally think that a sprint is the purest form. Like that, kids in the playground at school, that's what they start doing, race. That's the first thing. That is the most. Sure. So I have no problem with that. I think the issue I have with it being such an important cut from 20 to 10 is that you can't like. Let's say you were like just below the cut and you needed to give that extra thing. You can't do that in a sprint. You're only as fast as you can go. If it had been anything else where you're like, you know what, I'm just going to go unbroken and I'm going to go for it. And even if I fail, I'm going to give it everything. You can't do that in a sprint. There is no room to catch up. You could have tested everyone 2 weeks ago and known what the results are going to be, basically, right? Yeah. So how do you feel about that sprint event? And that's a good way to actually get into what happened to Travis.
Well, I'm torn on the issue for a bunch of reasons. One is I think people, if you're calling yourself the fittest on earth, should sprint.
Absolutely.
So with 100% certainty, I love that they bring sprinting into the games. I guess some of the issues that I have is like it's 1/6 of the testing body to determine the 10 fittest that need to be representative. I'm not sure. I think that's at least worth a discussion or some sort of a debate. I'm not 100% positive. The other thing is, so in a field of 20, if you lose, it's 5 points of a difference. So Travis took 6th place on the sprint, and he lost 5th place by 0.001 second.
Right.
That would have put him into the top 5 of the sprint event, which would have been 5 more points, which would have catapulted him above 2 athletes on the overall leaderboard and put him into the top 10. Now, this is somebody who trains full time to be an athlete, and now we're subject to wondering do those RFID chips, are they accurate to point to 1,000th of a second? Because that's what they're using to determine that his weekend's over. I don't know. I don't know what equipment they're using because we don't get briefings on that. Here's what we're using, here's how we're measuring it. All of that stuff is kind of happens just behind the scenes, and we get to watch. The other thing about it is that independently, so 0.001 second is a difference of 5 points, or a 5% difference in overall fitness. But if you lost by 40 seconds on the ruck run and you were only 1 place behind somebody else, that has less of a point value difference than 1/100th of a second. So what that does to me is it highlights that the scoring system is not necessarily reflecting fitness. It's reflecting your relative placing, which means that the field of athletes you're doing it against has a huge impact on the actual measurement of fitness, which I think isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. So I'm torn. There's part of me that's wants to throw a hissy fit and be like, this sucks, he should be in the finals, but there's another part of me.
But then if it had gone the other way, the other guy would have fit.
Exactly, yeah.
So Travis's run where he finished 6th in that, was it a good run?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so Travis and Noah have both done sprint events at the games and finished poorly. And Brandon, one of our coaches here, has done sprint and change direction.
Noah finished
work.
pretty good, right?
Noah finished 3rd.
3rd, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So we had, and basically I went there to coach Will, Noah, and Travis, and Noah finished 3rd. Will finished 5th, and he pulled up because he pulled his hamstring actually in that event.
Was another one of your athletes that knocked Travis out?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then Travis finished 6th. So it was a real moment of pride that they could all sprint. They all had done change of direction work. So Trav finishing 6th was definitely a surprise, but he's also really good at performing when his back's up against the wall. So like we had a talk right before, and I was like, look, you've been in a place at regionals where you had to perform to make it to the games. It's no different. You're just on a bigger stage. So like, this is a cut. Go out there and give it your all. His first run was like superb, and he looked great and like took off. Great sprint mechanics, good change of direction. The second one, he was fifth in his heat leading into the bubble turns, and he passed everyone in his heat to tie that one guy. Well, it was a tie until they went to the thousandth of a second. So that was just like a great execution to change of direction. So I would say that he performed really well there, but if you talk to him, he'd say like, well, it wasn't good enough. So I think that's the difference of being a coach who can be a little bit more objective versus an athlete. Is like they got to hold themselves to that standard.
Travis is like the opposite of Noah, right? Like he's the guy in training every day that like crushes it, that at every sanctional, he probably had behind Matt the best season in the world, I want to say, like in terms of placements or prize money or whatnot. He was great all year round. Largely, I think, driven by a chip on his shoulder, right? Like that's how he performs. And then he goes to games and like, well, Noah benefits from this system, goes to the top 10, and it works out well for him. This hurts him. Do you think, though, that, you know, accumulating chips in his shoulder, as long as it doesn't collapse under the weight of it,
until it's just the chip becomes too big.
Until he can't lift anything anymore. But I mean, it could be good for him, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he does. People don't talk about it a lot, and like obviously it might not be the most marketable characteristic, but anger is an invigorating emotion, and it gives you fuel to move forward. So I think like there's going to be a little bit of anger that Trav beat Noah all year at a lot of workouts and in competitions, and then now one of your training partners just took second in the world and you missed the cut. So like that in and of itself is probably going to give him some motivation to move forward and make sure he's paying attention. Like losing that closely, like those near misses, 0.001 seconds, it gives you a respect for like how tight the margin of error really is. And I think that in and of itself, just experiencing that gives you a greater level of detail that you approach your day-to-day with. Like when he's doing his Metcons in the gym, like, are you focused on everything? Like where, you know, your foot placement when you're making a transition, like your setup time when you're approaching the barbell, how many times you're taking chalk breaks, like all those little details. And I think we have been piling on a greater level of awareness and consistency and overall ability to execute on game day, but this is just like another little like emotional jab to bring it now.
So the counter argument is that like Tia and Mac, they could add a second to every one of their WODs and they'd have still made it through, right? You basically got to put yourself in a situation where 1/1000th of a second doesn't matter. And I'm sure that's what he's saying and what he's thinking. But it is interesting when you sort of look back, like last year, I don't know how many points it was, but very narrowly missed out on going to the games. The year before, there's that great clip on the update thing where with guys like, I forgot, was it Pat Sherwood? I can't remember. It was like, I forgot Travis even went to the games. I think he finished 10th that year. He's kind of just that guy that's just like, he keeps getting the short end of the stick. So I'm optimistic that this will be a good thing for him. Has he been working out since the games, or is he still
he's taking time off. They're all like, I think just in general, the way that I coach is no matter how the weekend goes and how you feel right afterwards, you're coming down from a very, very, very long preparation to get to that moment. And instead of just trying to keep riding that high, it's nice to like sit back, reflect, get all your aches and pains going on, and also start your preparation in a way that it's mimicking what the competitive season's all about. So games level fitness is different than open fitness. In open fitness, you have to be able to go at max effort on a singular workout and then recover fast enough to do it again 3 days later on the same exact workout. And it actually might be a higher level of singular workout intensity than the games, because it's like everyone in the world and they're doing the one test and people are evaluating it. You can practice it. You don't know what they're doing. You're not next to them. So the overall level of volume for a little while will drop. The intensity, the open specific movements will become a bigger portion of training. Like, do you need to be doing a ton of open water swim workouts before the open? Probably not. So we got to sit down, reflect, game plan, figure out what went well, what didn't go well, and come up with a plan for the next, it's 9 weeks from today until the games, but we'll probably prep for till the open, we'll probably prep for 6.
So I'm curious. So I saw you guys. Travis attended the games. Oh, was it on Sunday? I bumped into you guys. So he was there. He was watching events.
Yeah.
How was that? How was it? How was that? Like, obviously, you are. You're there with Will.
Will Moorad.
They're both in the top 10, right?
Yeah, Will took 10th.
So you had two guys in the top 10, and you're hanging out with a guy who finished 11th, who's the closest one to make it. How was that managing those?
Well, look, the whole experience was like, it was so emotionally overwhelming that I didn't really know what I was feeling emotionally, because we were also concerned. So Will was in 5th place after the sprint event. He took 5th in the run because he pulled up in the final heat of 5, and he was in 5th overall. And now you make your cut to 10th. But Will pulled his hamstring. He got a grade 1 tear, so like it'll be a couple weeks, and it would have been stupid to continue doing some of the workouts. Like he had to sit out the clean, but he could do the dumbbell snatch peg board even though he went like...
Can we stop you there? Do you think he should have pulled out and let the 11th place person come in?
Well, we talked about that. At first, we didn't know how bad it was.
Okay.
So I was like, look, the next workout could be 100 strict handstand push-ups for time, and you might win, and that's $3,000, and that will catapult you on the leaderboard. And like, you're not just playing a game now that's about fairness, but like he's a professional athlete, and if that happened in another venue, or like if they did do that, and then Cole Sager was in 11th and he got bumped in, and then he falls or something and sprains his ankle, then do you keep going back? And so I feel like it kind of brought out that the cut system might be imperfect, because if Will pulls out and withdraws, is he guaranteed 10th? Because if they say no, he's disqualified, and they move him back, then that is kind of an unfair situation to move somebody else in, but he also, because they didn't do the work either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird that the testing...
So the person at the end of the weekend who's in 10th would then drop to 11th, but that wouldn't work. So
so he would have taken last place if he withdrew. So we were kind of worried throughout the whole end of that, like, what do we do? Like, do we go out there and are they setting minimum work requirements? We talk to the head judge. Like, I'm just trying to figure out that. Then Noah's having his best games ever, and he's in first. And Trav, who's like my brother, who I've trained for 7 years, my gym is in his gym, and like we're together day in and day out, missed the cut line by 1,000th of a second. So it was like all of those things at once were so overwhelming that I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like focus on each person. But I mean, Trav's
before we get to Trav, I want to ask, so I was standing right behind Dave during when he pulled out of the clean.
Yeah.
And Dave seemed to not know that he was injured.
Yeah.
So he calls him over, and they seems quite a frank conversation.
Yeah.
Do you know what that conversation was?
I think, I don't really know. All Will told me was that he was asking him why he didn't attempt it. Dave was trying to get some sort of an understanding of his capabilities, like, because he asked him, could you do that? And Will can clean 350 pounds. Like, it's not, he wouldn't have won the clean event, but he definitely wouldn't have, like, not attempted the first bar.
What was the first?
It was 315. Yeah.
That's right.
It would have been like a relatively easy power clean for him, but at the moment, Will couldn't even like bend over without pain. So I was like, a max clean probably isn't the best thing. And we actually asked, can you just sit it out? Like, do you have to go out there? And I know they talked something about that. Will kind of explained his perspective, like, this is what I can do. Didn't think it was worth it. He's an athlete who's also not thinking just about the games. He's thinking about, like, he made a comeback. He had a great season. He was on a couple sanctionals podiums. He'd like to go do other ones before. And as a soccer player, he had completely ruptured his hamstring. So if that happened, you could have to have surgery. You could be out for a long period of time. So we're just trying to balance all of those things. And it was just a weird situation. But from his perspective, he's like, I just did a walk of shame in front of like 15,000 people that think I can't clean 315 now. Like, it's not like that was a fun experience to do that.
Yeah, he couldn't sort of say, I'm injured.
Yeah, and people kept like cheering for him to try it. And he's like, you can't fake trying 315 clean.
I always feel like there should be some sort of sash that, like, if you're recovering from an injury, that you wear to the box so that people understand what you're doing. They're like, why is he doing that? You're like,
this is my injury vest.
It's my injury vest, exactly.
They have it in football, like a red penny you put on.
I want to say something else about that event that I thought was funny and scary. So I think it's quite interesting that the volunteer staff are required to move all the weights that the athletes are. You know, when you saw, is it Big Bob? You saw teams of 4 volunteers, but I'm like, the teams of 4. But what happened with the clean was quite interesting, is some guy rolls out the 315 to the middle of the floor, I don't think he had processed the fact that he was going to have to deadlift that cold because it's a 6-inch
to get it on the platform.
And I'm watching, I'm like, oh no, I hope he's thought that through because I am sure he could do it.
Yeah.
But not cold, and not if he hadn't mentally prepared.
Yeah. And lift it up and
lift it up and move
yeah.
it. So actually he missed. Only one wheel got on, then someone else ran and get it. I've looked to see if the video's out there. It's not, but as I was watching, I was like, that's a pretty heavy bar. I hope he just didn't grab it and stuff. Because most of the stuff you just roll it out there, you don't have to worry about that. But that was quite funny. But so you've got Travis, and he's sitting there. I mean, he's watching. I don't know how much he trains with Will. I know he trains with Noah.
Yeah, well, he trained with Will for like 3 straight years.
Okay, so he's very close with those guys.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like competitive brothers in some sense.
Yeah, so I mean, how tough was that for him, or do we need him to answer for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think you might need to ask him, but definitely tough. I think processing, like, he wanted to be on those floor, the tests look really good, he's got a great clean and wanted to be out there for that clean event, knowing that Will got hurt, so he's not even competing in the final workouts, and like, you know, same type of thought, like, well, why can't I go out there and be that 10th person then? And then, you know, Noah doing so well. I think it was just like a lot of emotions for him to process, but he's a professional. Like, and he's a professional who's dealt with loss before. So people, you know, like when Rich Froning took second and they showed that picture of him like on the podium sad, and I'm like, well, aside from 3 guys, everybody else who's ever competed in CrossFit loses. Like, it's just something you got to get over. You got to figure out how to like have some sort of context that like, hey, it's okay. I can move forward. I can learn from this. I can grow. There's other things here. He has sponsor obligations. So he's a professional. Like, you know, like it definitely wasn't the happiest couple days of his life, but he's not throwing a hissy fit about it.
But he also knows his numbers, right? So as he's watching the clean, is he like, he knows where to finish?
Yeah, I mean, he's cleaned 375 before, so he'd definitely be near the top. I mean, whether he could execute that like on the floor in that moment after Mary, like people always say like, oh, well, I could do that. I'm like, well, wait.
Although I think I'd have about a 30-pound PR in that. I mean, that many people cheering you on, I couldn't even imagine how strong you'd be.
Yeah.
Although if you do miss, it would be pretty humiliating.
Yeah, and you're like shaking from the nerves when you go out. It's definitely something that I think people underestimate how hard it is to just like manage your effort, anxiety, pacing, and like just hit the things that you know you can hit when that amount of pressure is on you. But
Travis, I mean, he was able to watch and like he wasn't bitter. You were saying, not really.
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
I think the fact that it was Noah that was the big breakout star probably made it harder. Yeah, and that's natural.
Harder and maybe also easier in some capacity too, because like, you know, athletes are in it for themselves. So like he's got to pay his bills, he's got to pay for his kids, he's got his legacy to build and all of that, but he's also part of a bigger community and, you know, he's friends with Noah, he's trained with Noah. So like there's probably some bittersweetness to that. And like on the one sense was like harder because it's somebody who he's so intimately knows he can beat that he didn't. But then also sweet in the fact that like, you know, I am out there and he's doing well and he's part of whatever training think tank is and our relationship. So, you know, they're probably more confusing than it is like in singular, simple emotion. It's complicated.
So overall, broadly speaking about the games, do you think, sort of compared to the trajectory we were on, and most people sort of understood how the games work, do you think this is a step back? Is it a step forward? Is it just a change of era?
Yeah, I think it's just an evolution. I think it's pretty clear that it's going to evolve from here. So it's global now, for sure. And it's reflected even in like business inquiries from other countries and people that are interested who, you know, Glassman even said it's putting a target on the back of all the national champions because now there's young people who are involved that know that they can go and they can be on the biggest stage in a sport with not that much capacity. Whereas in the past, in the regional system, you might be able to squeak into regionals like that, but even just to make regionals, you're a pretty high-level athlete. Yeah. Now, if you're in a country that doesn't really have a big CrossFit community, you could be a national champion with a year or less of training. So it definitely opened that up, which I think is good because any sport...
Did you feel that beforehand, or is that something that you've like grown to embrace?
That was one of the first things that I thought about. I was like, well, if they're cutting, like, it's not going to matter. It's just going to be one big field for a little while, and then they're all going to be cut.
Did you watch the opening ceremony?
I did.
It's pretty cool, right? It was like that's when I feel like a lot of people were like, okay, I see it now. Like these are like before. It was like there were just like countries on a piece of paper. When you actually saw the people, you were like, okay, I get this is really neat.
Well, we reconciled it, I feel, pretty quick. So Kyle Ruth, who coaches here, was a world level swimmer. And in the US, like the best swimmers are then the best swimmers at the world team trials or at the world championships or the Olympics as well. And there are people representative of other countries at the Olympics who would finish 15th place in the US. So it's kind of just something that is part of international sports. So when it happened, there was more of the struggle from our perspective was like, why is the US not getting more bids then? Because or some of the other countries that have either bigger populations or have more affiliates. So in the sport, like what's the distribution of affiliates in the US? Should that somehow dictate number of spots per nation instead of only national champions, where you could probably create a system where you guarantee one national champion from other countries and maybe more based on other variables. So like there were things that I thought like, okay, maybe this system could be implemented better in the future, but I wasn't thinking that it would be a step back. The sanctional process I think is good because it distributed power.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Regionals was not that entertaining to watch, really. I mean,
and it was the same thing for 3 straight weeks. You almost like by the end of it, I was like, ugh, I don't want to watch this workout anymore. So we'll get different tests, different test organizers, which I think best practices will evolve. Like, I do think there's a better way to score this. Like, we came up with some remedial system that we use for in-person camps and competitions that we think has some legs, depending on, really not really depending on anything, it's just depending on how you want to implement it. You can use it with 100 athletes or you can use it with 10 athletes, and the scoring system is more based on performance than relative placing. So I think there are going to be people out there that are statisticians trying to come up with ways for that to happen. I think there's going to be people that are going to start to think about fan viewership in a different way. Like, I know watching the games is so frustrating if you're not only focused on Matt Frazier. If you have the person who took 8th place in a specific heat, which could have like thousands of fans, like they could be the biggest person in their box, and you never see them. And there's not even a feed that just has the whole field. Like, I think there could just be one live stream field with a feed with no commentating that was just like, hey, here's the whole field, either from the top on a field event, that's just like a practice cam in football where you show the entire field where people can just see it and see where their person is and maybe go back and video review at a later time. I think people are going to be thinking about the spectacle. I think people are going to be thinking a lot about programming. So some of these sanctionals are games level, and some of them are like a weekend of training for these guys. So now it's going to be like, okay, well, who's going to what, who's programming what? Are there standards for what a CrossFit sanctional means? Can you put anything in there? Is there going to be some corruption there because of that? Because people have somebody who's really good at 5 things and they can create those tests for that one person. So it's definitely going to be interesting. It's going to come with some pains, but I do think a step in the right direction. It also seems like this would be a better, they're going away from the title sponsor of Reebok, which I think is good not because I don't like Reebok, but because now other companies can be represented on the floor in terms of apparel. I think it's good. I do think that there are things I would like to change, but so would everyone, right? Like, I'm just a coach and I got my own organization, so I got to focus on that and not get too frustrated. But I don't think it's a step back. I just think the organizational structure needs, the one thing I would say that would be really helpful is just communication, a way for us to communicate back. Because I don't even know, like, if I did have something, I don't even know who I would talk to. Or if I would have a voice. It's like, oh, well, you're not level 1, so like we don't want to hear you type thing. Or if it'd be like, oh yeah, cool, you could submit your opinions here and like we'll take it into consideration, some sort of like, hey, what's happening next year? Like, these people, their primary earnings are as CrossFit athletes. If, there was rumors at one point that the games wasn't going to happen this year. And there were people at the games with pretty reputable backgrounds in this thing that validated that there was legitimate talks that would be the case. It'd be nice for athletes to know that so they could like make life plans, because we've been putting a lot of time and preparation into the development of that. So that type of communication stuff definitely sucks to be on the outside of. And it seems like the inside of that circle has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So
my conclusion is when the changes started being announced after the last games, there was a lot of people saying, is this the end of the games?
Yeah.
What's the games going to look like? Is it going to be broadcast? Is it going to be people with iPhones and stuff? I feel like no one now is thinking that this sport is going away, that they might have done a year ago.
Yeah.
I think people go in there and say, it felt basically like the games. It looked like it on TV.
Yeah.
I think Rogue stepping up and all the stream stuff was pretty good.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty optimistic about the future.
Yeah, me too. I think also, one of the things that we said is like, people want to compete in this and people want to watch it. And it really is a spectacle. Like the bodies of both the males and the females at the highest level in this sport are like, they're crazy to look at in motion doing what they do, and half of them train like half naked. So whether or not people admit that, that's, you know, there is going to be some sort of an appeal for an audience to want to watch that. There already is an audience. There's all the affiliates who do it. It's a sport that the consumer of the sport is actually doing the sport, which is like, not a lot of people playing basketball, watching basketball, are like out in pickup leagues playing basketball. So I do think that in one capacity or another, it's going to succeed. Whether or not it is the sport of CrossFit, or if that gets, you know, CrossFit sells it entirely and it becomes a sport of fitness and it gets its own governing body. Like, I think it's going somewhere. Just in what capacity, who knows? But,
I agree. All right, enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Stuff. That was awesome.
It's a wrap, you know what I'm saying? Your boy Project Pata in this thing, man. Hey, look, man, thank y'all for watching Training Think Tank's YouTube channel. Y'all hit that motherfucking subscribe button, you know what I'm saying? So y'all go ahead, man. Thank y'all for watching the channel, you know what I'm saying? Hit that motherfucking subscribe button. Let it be known, what it be known, what it be known, you know what I'm saying? Pata.